everyone. I'm going to be doing something very different this episode, and so welcome to this US election special edition of the BCS Podcast. I'm going to be speaking to a range of Americans from across the political spectrum on who they are voting for, why, and what are the most important issues for them in this election. And let's start with Ruth Bennett. Ruth is a retired US State Department diplomat in her 50s. She served in Germany, India, Thailand, and the UK, among other countries. Post-retirement, she is now able to speak freely, and so here is what she had to say when I asked her why she is voting for Kamala Harris.
Well, that's really the question, isn't it? It's a big question, and there's a there's a multi-part answer to that. I should say that I don't actually consider myself to be a Democrat. My political opinions don't align very neatly with either major party. I've worked in the US government for a long time. I have an extremely pragmatic view on things. There's a lot that moderate Republicans have proposed over the years that I completely agree with. So this is not a party vote. And, we can talk policies, but I would say it's not a policy vote either. I would say that this is a really important election, and a lot of it just comes down to very fundamental questions about qualifications and fitness to serve. And I think if you boil everything down, and it's a lot to boil down, that is the primary thing that directed my vote.
Okay, all right. That's your vote is your vote, and it's whatever your reasons are as valid as anyone else. You mentioned that it's not necessarily a policy platform that you're voting on. It's more to do with qualification and experience. Are there any particular issues that has in your mind has made you say, yeah, I'm going with Kamala Harris rather than Donald Trump then?
Well, let's start with the basics. The man has been found guilty of 34 felonies. He's been found liable for sexual battery. It's interesting. We've seen him lately wearing an apron and sort of cosplaying being a McDonald's employee. If you had somebody with 34 felonies and found liable for sexual battery who applied for a job at McDonald's, chances are pretty good that he wouldn't get it. Chances are pretty good that no customer service or retail establishment would hire somebody with that background. And I just have to wonder that why the standard for arguably being the leader of the free world is lower than that for working at McDonald's or a retail job.
Okay. One of the things that has been said actually increasingly during this election campaign is that Kamala Harris is being held to a higher standard than Donald Trump. Do you think that is a fair assessment?
I think that's absolutely a fair assessment. As I say, I'm not especially partisan. I will fully concede that some of Harris's answers, they've been described as word salad, and I think that's fair. I think any public official, having worked with the media, you give interviews, you get tired, you work with the press, you say silly things, your thoughts don't correspond with what's coming out of your mouth. It happens to everyone. But I think you compare that to what Donald Trump says pretty much every time he speaks, especially lately. And I think you've got a fairly obvious and gross double standard, yes.
And why, in your opinion, why do you think that is?
It's a very good question, and I'd love to know why Donald Trump has gotten away with saying so much of what he has. I think standards are starting to change and to catch up. I remember the first time the New York Times described something that he said as a lie, and I think the media world kind of collectively took in their breath, because prior to that, there was this kind of standard of decency and assumptions of goodwill, and it was quite a big step to describe a politician as lying. But on the other hand, when you've got this absolute barrage of false information, at a certain point, you're just going to have to call it what it is. So I think that double standard is slowly disappearing, but it's definitely too little, too late.
And I mean, one of the points that was made very loudly once Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee was this assertion that she was a DEI hire. What was your response to that kind of rhetoric?
Well, I think that's very silly and very insulting. I mean, the woman is an accomplished professional who has demonstrated her qualifications in government over a number of years, which is an awful lot more than Donald Trump has done.
And I suppose I think we do have to be very fair to both sides here and say, one of the big differences in this election cycle is that Donald Trump has been through a primary process, whereas Kamala Harris hasn't. And it has to be said that when Kamala Harris did go through a primary process back in 2019, 2020, she dropped out relatively quickly because of a lack of funding and a lack of support. Do you understand the criticisms that she's received about not having gone through a quote unquote proper primary process, unlike her opponent in this election?
I can't say that I really do, because what she has done is appear as the vice president on a ticket that people voted for. If they had objections to Kamala Harris, then they had the option of not voting for that ticket. So what's happened is that, the primary purpose of the vice president is to step in if the president steps down. And that is exactly what she's done. So I don't see anything even non-standard about this whole process.
Okay. And we haven't talked about policy at all in this chat, and I would like to have a little bit of policy discussion if we can. I've looked at both policy platforms, and I know what I think of both. And I assume you have seen both policy platforms yourself, Ruth?
I have, yes.
Okay, and one of the things that has struck me in this election cycle is that there has been some criticism of Kamala Harris's policy platform. For example, Senator Lindsey Graham recently described Kamala Harris's policy platform as, quote, a mile wide and an inch deep. As someone who is voting for Kamala Harris, what do you think of those kind of criticisms of her policy platform?
Well, I'm afraid I do have to push back just a little bit. I mean, we can certainly talk about individual policy positions, but policy positions evolve. I mean, when you vote for a presidential candidate, what you're doing is you're voting for an administration. And that administration is going to craft the actual policy positions in response to the conditions on the ground. I mean, policy platforms are an indicator of the direction that things are likely to go. But, it was Mario Cuomo, the former New York State governor, who said that, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. So, we can sit back and we can examine these poetry statements, but what it really comes down to is how are they going to craft the actual prose of governing? And that's why I come back to character and ability to lead, because the president is going to form the administration. Their primary position is that of manager and sort of, I wouldn't say HR director, because obviously that's going to be done by other people, but in the more general abstract sense, they are choosing the people who are going to craft the actual positions, who are going to do the day-to-day work of government. So you have to ask, is this person a good administrator? Are they a good manager? And I'm really much more keyed into the difference in the candidates on that basis than on whether their platform is a mile wide and an inch deep, because that's criticizing the poetry rather than the actual governance.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ruth. It's been an absolute joy to speak to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
It is also important to acknowledge that Donald Trump has a lot of support too. Shane Jones is a married father of two in his 30s from Nashville, Tennessee. Here is what he had to say to me when I asked him why he is voting for Donald Trump.
I'm voting for Donald Trump because he's a man who has kept his promises. He delivers on the promises he campaigns on. He's not a lifelong politician. You know, a lot of times, especially here in America, I can't speak for you guys in the UK, but we have lifelong politicians who have been in office for 30, 40 years, and we're just sick of seeing that, in all honesty.
Yeah, so that's an important thing for you, that he doesn't have that perception of being a lifelong politician. It's important to you that he's come from outside the political sphere, is it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's run multiple businesses. He's run very well. Some he's failed on, but he's definitely he's employed a lot of people and he's created jobs. He's also benefited from the economy that he's created. So.
Okay then, and in terms of this election, what are the most important issues for you in this election?
Well, there's a few things that are near and dear to me. I'd say that the southern border is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. He ran on that in his first in 2016, his first time, and he delivered on a lot of the promises that he made during his campaign. He built over 400 miles of the border wall. Yes, he didn't get it completed, but he built over 400 miles. That's more than any other president. He had a lot of obstruction in the way of getting that done, but he fought for it and was able to get a lot of it accomplished. He ended the dangerous practice of catch and release, which is basically when illegals cross the border, they're then released into America and given a court date to come back. And a lot of times they don't come back for those court dates that are 3 to 4 months down the road. He ended that program and he instituted what was called the Remain in Mexico policy. So they would remain in Mexico while they were awaiting asylum. Another thing that's important. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, I mean, I was just going to say that when we are talking about Trump's immigration policy, one of the big things that is thrown back at him is the child separation policy, and surely that is a horrible thing that happened in his first term, and that's not something that you would want to see happen again.
Well, I think there's certain instances where it's important and it's necessary, and let me point out that policy actually begun under the Obama administration.
Please be aware that this is not correct. The child separation policy was formally enacted under the Trump administration following a speech by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions on May the 7th, 2018. There is no suggestion that Shane was deliberately trying to mislead.
And I think it is important that when all these families come to the border, we're not 100% sure that the parent who is saying that they are that parent's child or that parent or that child's parent is actually that child's parent. They could be whoever. They could be kidnapped. They could be being trafficked. We're not 100% sure. So if they're separated until the administration or not the administration, but the investigation could be taking place to make sure that is actually the parent of that child. I think that's extremely important.
And it has to be said that it is estimated by the government itself that around 5,000 children have not yet been reunited with their parents, and this is something that was happening 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I mean, surely that is not something that can happen again.
I mean, absolutely. I don't think there's a place if that is the case. I don't agree with separating families. and taking kids away from their parents. Obviously, I don't think that's necessary. If they can 100%, prove that they are the parents of that child, then I don't know that it's necessary to take them away from their parents. No, I don't necessarily agree with that. But let me make this point: if you break a law here in America, and you go to jail, are we not separating parents from their children at that point? You don't take the child to jail with the parent. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
I think there
I
is,
understand where you're coming from.
yeah. So
But
I think there's, I think
what I
that
would
at
say,
times,
what I would say is that child knows where its parent is, and the parent knows where its child is, and there is no, how do I put this? There is no risk of that child not having a guardian in place, not having a parental relationship, because both knows where the other is. Whereas under the previous Trump administration, as I say, there are 5,000 children who don't know where their parents are, and there are 5,000 sets of parents that don't know where their child is. So that is,
yeah. Well,
respectfully, Shane, it's two different issues there.
okay. Well, let's also think about this. It's been 4 years since Trump's been out of office. So are we still blaming Trump for these kids not being reunited with their parents after 4 years of the left Biden administration? I mean, is that what I'm saying? Why have these kids not been um, put back with their parents or given back to their parents in the past 4 years, if that's the case?
Well, people would say that the reason why that's not been able to happen is because Border Patrol under the Trump administration was not properly documenting the children and the parents so that they could be reunited. So it's not a Biden-Harris issue. It's an issue that happened under the Trump administration.
Gotcha. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I mean, to blame Trump for something that that they're continuing to let go on. I mean, maybe it's not so easy as to let every there's a big operation down there on the border. I mean, it's a big operation to handle when you have thousands of migrants coming across. So, how do you find a room for every parent and um, you know border, I say border jumper, or somebody who even just shows up at the border and seeks asylum? How do you find a room for everyone to stay with their family? You know what I'm saying? Is that the American people's job for their taxpayers to go to? I don't agree so.
Okay, well, I mean, this is a very important issue, and I would like to continue talking about it, but there are other issues to get to. At this point, there was a technical issue, and we had to briefly stop recording. We then resumed recording so that Shane could make one final point. Okay, so Are there any other final issues that are important for you in this election, Shane?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, protecting our Second Amendment right is extremely important to me. I think it's a God-given right to be able to arm and protect yourself from danger, wherever that may come from. So.
Okay, and from what I've seen of both candidates' stated policy platforms, neither from what I've read are threatening to take guns away from law-abiding Americans. So, how do you separate both candidates on that issue?
Okay, well, yeah, Kamala has flip-flopped on this issue. As of lately, she's tried to paint herself as a gun owner. I guarantee you that lady does not own a gun. If she has, she's got it stored away in a safe somewhere. She never touches the thing. She's been painting herself as a protector of the Constitution, and she's frequently mentioned that she's a gun owner here lately, and that's it. But her career as the Attorney General in San Francisco, it speaks otherwise. Just for example, she supported I think it was called Proposition H, which prohibited and confiscated. She wanted to prohibit and confiscate semi-automatic weapons. As you know, the AR-15 is one of the most popular sporting rifles here in America. I love to hunt, fish. I've shot deer with my AR-15. I've never shot a person with it, and there's millions of other people like me out there. In 2006, as the district attorney, she backed Proposition H and prohibited residents of San Francisco within city limits from buying, selling, owning handguns of any kind, and banned all city residents without exception from selling, distributing, transferring, and manufacturing firearms and ammunition. So she has a long record. I'm sure I could be wrong on this, but I guarantee you from the NRA, she's got an F record from the NRA. She's not going to stand up for our Second Amendment rights. I know that the left hasn't for years. She can say that now because she wants to gain traction with gun owners, especially the Democrats who are gun owners.
Okay, well, it should be said that the NRA only represents about 5% of American gun owners, so as much as they may give an F rating, other organisations in the US may not give her an F rating. So I think that's important to state.
But her record speaks for itself on the issue. She's openly admitted that she believes that there should be a gun confiscation of the AR-15, which if anybody that knows anything about guns, it's a semi-automatic gun that's just like a handgun. You pull the trigger once, it goes bang. You pull it again, it goes bang. It's not an automatic rifle. Automatic rifles are banned here in the States and have been for a long time.
Okay, well, I think the point that has to be asked then is, I have not seen anything in either candidate's policy platform where they are proposing to take people's guns away. You know, I've certainly seen the Harris and Walz campaign talking about red flag laws and background checks and stuff of that nature. You know, you don't. Do you take issue? Do you take issue with those proposals?
Red flag laws it's a mixed bag. Because honestly, you could have someone who is crazy, or someone gets in an argument with someone else, and they immediately say, "Oh, well, I don't think that person deserves to own a gun," right? And so then they can call authorities and basically file a complaint on you. Your rights can be, infringed upon. When really that person was just upset and on a different side of an argument than you. Are you catching what I'm throwing there?
No,
So
I'm catching what you're saying.
I think
Some
red
would
flag.
say though that. Go on.
Oh, I'm just saying. I think
Go on,
red
Shane.
flag laws could be abused. I definitely don't think it's out of the question. That's not something that I'm like totally against. I definitely think that serious inquiries need to be investigated upon. But I'm just not. I think that the red flag laws could be abused. As far as background checks, we already have a universal background check law here in the States. You go into any store to buy a gun, they're going to perform a background check on you. You have to pass that background check in order to buy a gun. Now, where she's probably talking about, she wants to put a background check on every transfer. So say I give my son or my daughter or anyone a gun, they want us to have to perform a background check in order to make that transfer. A friend, family member, which that's not always the case.
Sure,
So.
because the loophole in the US is that guns can be sold at trade shows and conventions and that kind of thing without a background check happening.
Not really. Yeah, the background show loophole is kind of BS. That's very rare. Most places that you have a gun show, you're going to have a background check performed as well. If it's an FFL dealer. Yeah.
Okay then. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Shane. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me and to give the view of a Republican, because I think it's very important that we represent the opinions of everyone across the political spectrum when it comes to this election. So thank you very much for your time, Shane. Bret Griffin is 40 years old. He works in the financial sector and is originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, but now lives in Scotland. Here is what he had to say when I asked him why he has chosen not to vote at all in this election.
So really it comes down to the fact that when I last lived in the US, I lived in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is just not a competitive state. If you go back to the 2004 election, I think it's been 65% roughly thereabouts for the Republican every election since. and actually every single county in the state has gone for the Republican as well. So whilst I have opinions on it, I'm interested in it. The fact is, just from a Oklahoma perspective, it's not particularly close. And it's not just at the presidential level either. It goes down to the other down ballot candidates as well. So even whether I was voting for a senator, which I don't think Oklahoma has a Senate election this year, but for House of Representatives as well, it just really doesn't make any difference.
As part of our ensuing discussion, I mentioned to Bret that the demographics of Oklahoma are starting to change due to efforts on a state level to bring more young professionals into Oklahoma, such as a scheme in his hometown of Tulsa, where the city government is offering $10,000 to remote workers to move to the city. And so I asked Bret if he has potentially taken a crucial vote away from his preferred candidates in a state that may have become more purple in recent years.
In a way, I kind of hope you're right, because it would be nice to actually have a competitive election, but being perfectly honest, I don't think so, no. I mean, there has been certainly some trying to draw people into the state. So like where I'm from in Tulsa, they have an initiative that's been going on for a while now to try and recruit remote workers. I think you can get paid $10,000 to come live in Tulsa. That's brought in quite a few people. But just looking at the presidential election, I believe the numbers from memory, I want to say in 2000, were about 1 million people voted for Trump and about 500,000 or thereabouts voted for Biden. So it's about 2/3 of 1/3. And those percentages, I say, are consistent since 2004. So whilst the demographics could be shifting, it's nowhere near to that yet. I mean, if you use Texas, the border state, as a bit of a comparison, there's been chat for years and years that Texas is becoming more and more purple. And to some extent, it is becoming more purple, but it's still a pretty safe Republican seat. And I think we're quite a few years away from Texas becoming a true toss-up. And Oklahoma, I'm sure, is even further behind Texas if it's ever going to become a toss-up state again.
Dr Michael Leavitt is a university lecturer who was originally from Illinois but now lives in Scotland. Here is what he had to say when I asked him why he is voting for Kamala Harris.
I've never really supported the Democrats or Republicans very much, quite honestly. There's a lot of parity between them. There's a lot to be desired, and there's a lot I don't agree with. Why am I voting for Kamala Harris and not Donald Trump, though? I mean, the list would be endless about Trump's transgressions, but I think it's quite clear to say that he speaks as if a fascist would. So hateful rhetoric among his supporters, hateful rhetoric from him himself, the way he holds himself, the way he treats others, dishonesty, not to mention the indictments or the felonies, some of the racist, xenophobic language, dehumanization of people is why. Now, there's a lot to be desired from the Democratic Party as well, and I certainly don't endorse many of their policies. But at the same point, if we were to care about the state of the country, I think it's quite clear, and I should say the world order as it exists today will be negatively impacted by a Trump presidency.
Okay, so it is very much then it's a vote against Donald Trump rather than a vote for Kamala Harris.
It's more of a vote against. Yeah, but it's more of a vote against. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's more of a vote against Donald Trump. It's a vote against an evil ideology. It's a vote against accepting who he is. His name is a brand, right? So just to say it's a vote against him, that's nowhere near encapsulating of what it's a vote against. It's a vote against far more than just him and his name, and against his presidency, but what it truly stands for. And I guess, Bert, I should as well say that I guess the reason I would even agree to come in on something like this is and I hope our views are challenged, but at the same point, I challenge media and people that do podcasts and all these type of things is we shouldn't be, there's not balance here. There's not two sides of a coin. There's sanity and insanity. And the people that are okay voting for that need to be called out, not questioned, but confronted. And that's how I would describe my opinion. So I hope that encapsulates it a little bit more.
Okay, yeah, I absolutely hear you, and I agree that yes, like I should be challenged, and you should be challenged. Everyone should be challenged in their view, because that is how we progress as a society, is by challenging each other, having civilized debates, which is what I've wanted to do with every guest on this show, and hopefully we come out of it, better educated on both sides, and everyone can move forward. But is the worry then that any kind of checks and balances that were in place in that first term, do you worry that those checks and balances would not be in place for a potential second Trump term then?
I would even argue that the checks and balances failed in the first term as well. I think we're giving the United States too much credit. I think the system itself is in danger of survival. If you look at global democracy rankings, the United States continues to fall and be among countries that it really shouldn't be. But will those be worse? Of course. Of course they will. The checks and balances will only be less. And there is absolutely no reason for those checks and balances to believe that they'll exist. These are the people around him. These are the people that he surrounds himself with. I have no faith whatsoever in any checks and balances. I think we need to start being somewhat careful about differences between political beliefs and hateful ideology and accepting those. And those two should never go hand in hand. It is never okay to follow an individual with hateful ideas, hateful speech, and hateful rhetoric because you may like his idea on the economy. And let's be honest here, Bret. Let's talk about his political ideas. Those people that may claim to be benefited by his economic policies. What are they? What is it that he points to? And it's a joke to even consider those. I think it's actually quite undermining to the people that he harms to even put those on a pedestal for discussion, because we're then treating this as a normal situation. We're treating this as a normal discussion, and it's not. It's quite frankly not. Those ideas are meaningless at this point. But if we talk about the nonsense around tariffs, what about his tax cuts in 2017 going to the very wealthy? What political ideology do you follow? His decimation of the Department of Education, is that what we're looking for? His removal of a right to women and their own bodies? Now, I'm a healthcare, individual, and I've seen what decimated healthcare does to people, right? I don't understand what is it that he offers people that he panders to. There is no political ideology that can be put in this scale and balanced, and it's really a disservice to the language that comes out to people. We should be standing up. I mean, just recently it was just Haitians and eating pets on a live political platform. And we want to talk about the ideas between, a tariff and a tax and a healthcare system and an infrastructure idea. Oh, that's all meaningless at this point because human decency has gone out the window. So,
and to that point, Michael, I will say that the claims that the Trump and Vance campaign has made about Haitian immigrants in the city of Springfield, Ohio, have been disproved. The city manager said there's been no evidence of that, so we should absolutely say that. And I absolutely hear everything that you've said. Trump is talking about putting a 20% tax on all goods from every country exporting into the United States, and he's talking about a 60% tariff on Chinese goods, and it would be trying to be as fair as I can be on this. It would be very interesting to see how he thinks that would work. Just to talk about the other side before we wrap up, you've said that you are not necessarily voting for the Democrats. What is it about the Democrats that concerns you and that delights you?
Yeah, it's the same things. I mean, if we're here in the UK, right, we can talk about there's a lot of parity between the Tories and the Labour Party. There really is. And there's a lot of common ground, unfortunately, between the Democrats and Republicans, too. So I think some of the issues that concern me are some of the weaknesses. And just first of all, there's a few different issues, and some of them are political, some of them are action-based, and some of them are policy-based. Some of the action-based stuff is just the failure to act time and time again. Republicans frequently will wield power. Democrats don't.
Okay,
even when they're in it.
Okay, and
So,
so what examples would you
yeah,
give?
exactly.
To back up that?
So Biden had opportunity to make inroads into the Supreme Court, right? What did we do there while we were in power? What did Obama do when he was in power to take care of these things? The answer is nothing. I think there's a lot of corporatism or centrism among the Democrats as well. There are a lot of improper happenings on both sides of the aisle, inability to pass legislation to block lawmakers from having involvement in the stock market, even though they have, information that will be personally beneficial to them. And both people on the aisle have done that. But more or less, I think having a society that time and time again fails on healthcare, fails on immigration, fails on the leaders who stand in front of the American people, get away with frequent cronyism and nepotism, and it's never dealt with. Being in the healthcare environment, I just think the United States is not just statistically pathetic with what it could be, right? Because they don't rank high among like nations, maybe last among like nations as far as healthcare outcomes, as far as other healthcare metrics. But the Democrats don't take on these issues either. It's always status quo. And I would argue that the needle has moved so much with the way the media and the Democrats have been fighting the Republicans. The Democrats have moved right. So there's not a policy that I can point to that really excites me, but I can point to policies that instill fear into me from the Republican side.
Okay, well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure there would be a lot of Republicans that would push back about that, and that is absolutely very right. And I'm sure that there would be a lot of Democrats.
They can push back. Yeah,
I'm sure.
But let's be honest here, Brett. The party's been hijacked. The Republican Party isn't the Republican Party that it was. So that is not to say that there aren't conservative ideals that, although I may disagree with, that are somewhat respectable or plausible of discussion. But the party itself is no longer the party that it was. And right now, it is the MAGA Republican Party. It is. Okay. And there is nothing positive about that. There's nothing with potential to contribute to a beneficial United States to the world, right? Nothing.
Okay, well, what I would say, Michael, is you have made your views loud and clear, and I really appreciate the passion that you've shown, because it is, these are subjects that people should be passionate about. We are going to have to end there, but as I say, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, Michael. Thank you for your time.
And I appreciate your time too, Michael. Finally, David P. Darlington is a retired public servant in his 70s. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, grew up in Arizona, but has lived in different parts of California since the late 1960s. Here is what he had to say when I asked him why he has already voted for the Harris-Walz ticket by a mail-in ballot.
To say that Trump scares the heck out of me would be is definitely an issue. But I believe that, and Harris has come, her whole political life has been in California. So I'm familiar with her and her work as a district attorney and through the state government. So I'm pretty familiar with her career, and I've always liked her and voted for her. And when I was in an area where I was eligible to do so, I felt that she was extremely fair. She listened really well to people, but she also was very firm about what she believed was the right thing to do, which is the correct thing to do. It may not have been popular, but it was the best thing to do. Whereas her opponent wants to be liked because he's a narcissist. So he'll say whatever needs to be said, where she does what needs to be done. I also really like the fact that that they put together a very concrete platform of what they want to accomplish and how they're going to do a lot of those things. They don't have concepts. They actually have written plans. And she has come out and said we still have a lot of work to do in this country. We do have a lot of issues, but there's no great fix because you wave a magic wand or because of your personality. It requires a lot of work from all of us to better our situation and to be very inclusive about everybody. An American is an American. You may disagree with them politically or whatever, but we're still all an American citizen. And our job is to, if you sort of cut to the chase, to be a patriot, you swear your allegiance to your country, not to an individual. And if you look through history, in those pretty awful human times, people swore an allegiance to an individual, not to the nation or the state that they belong to. It obviously happened. It's happening today, and certainly happened a great deal in the 20th century. The death and destruction is unbelievably, and I'm concerned that if Trump were to win, we would start going down that road. And that really is a very terrifying thing. I've never felt this afraid on a political scale in my life. And I'm 70, and I've been through a lot of elections. And this really does terrify me, frankly.
So when Donald Trump says that he will be a dictator on day one only if he's re-elected, you would not agree with that. You don't believe that. You think he intends to exercise more authoritarian control across the span of his term. Do you?
Absolute power corrupts. And when you have a taste of absolute power for one day, I mean, he's already corrupt and he lies constantly, but that's just a way to say that. And that's to sort of appease and use that as an excuse. Well, no, it's only going to be for one day. But if you look at his last term and what he's done since then, he does just the opposite.
So, so it's, for you then, it's very much a vote for Kamala Harris, who you know and who you've voted for in the past, given her involvement in Californian state politics, but it's also a vote against Donald Trump as well.
Absolutely. If it was Mitt Romney or another Republican running, I would still be voting for Harris because I don't agree with the GOP platform. And so I would be voting for Harris regardless of who that candidate was. But the fact that Trump is the candidate certainly has pushed me further into the Harris camp than I ever thought possible.
Okay. And just before we wrap up, one of the other things that I know about you is that you are now a grandfather to 2 grandchildren. So congratulations on that. What do you want whoever wins this election to do to benefit your grandchildren in the years to come?
Well, if Trump is elected, I will be very afraid for my grandchildren. Okay. I mean, I'm more at the end of my life rather than the front of my life, like my children and my grandchildren. So I don't worry about that for me as much. I guess that comes with age a little bit, but I do for them. And I think with Harris being elected, I think we have a chance to really start to address some of the issues here. They're not going to be fixed overnight. Presidents really don't have that much influence on the economy. Even though most of them take credit for it or distance themselves from it, it's run by our economic system and by the rest of the world as well. But how we handle issues, whether they're issues abroad, whether they're internal issues, good example was the pandemic. The Trump administration really did not address this seriously. And take it, and other government agencies did, and they sort of bypassed them a certain amount. And I think that I'm concerned that if he were to become elected again, first of all, he's taking steps to try to solidify his power. Platform, the 2025 project is a good example of that, and certainly just the GOP platform. and the things he said, and he would mobilize and utilize as many resources as he could to solidify his power. And if that means gutting the Constitution, he's going to feel that that's an okay thing to do, as many dictators in the past have done, as we've seen.
Well, it should be said, David, that Donald Trump has very publicly distanced himself from Project 2025 and said that he has nothing to do with that. I would take it that you would not that you do not believe him when he says that.
I believe very little that comes out of his mouth, number one. Number two, the fact that many of his current and past advisors are authors to this document. And if Trump is nothing else, being a narcissist, he's very aware of all the tools around him that enhance himself and his position in life. So he is extremely aware of it, but he just doesn't want to. But if you look at his platform and what he says, a lot of what he says is contained within that document.
Okay, okay, well, thank you very much for your time, David. We have to end there, but it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much for joining me. It should be said that I did ask other people if they would be prepared to be interviewed on camera for this episode, but they said no for a number of reasons. For example, I asked an LGBTQ friend of mine who was originally from one of the swing states but now lives in New England. They were very concerned about both their privacy and about their views potentially being weaponized against them. They did, however, agree to send me written answers on condition that I kept them anonymous. And so here is what they had to say when I asked them why they are voting for Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party. All of their answers will be voiced by an AI voice generator.
Among the political parties running a candidate this year, I am most aligned with the platform and values of the Green Party. I highly encourage folks to use tools like isidewith.com to better understand which parties and candidates best represent their values and political views. I am under no delusions that Jill Stein will be elected president, but I believe it is a waste of a vote to vote for someone you do not want to be president, and I do not want either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris to be president. So, I am voting for the person I actually want to win, the person I feel would best represent my interests and shares my core values. Not only that, but I am voting strategically against further entrenchment of the Democratic and Republican Party's domination of politics in the United States, because we deserve better options beyond the neoliberal and imperial bipartisan consensus. It is no accident that third-party politics have never gotten much momentum in the U.S. Despite many popular policy positions, and a public desperate for more options, both mainstream parties have long waged an anti-democratic suppression campaign to ensure they are the only electable options on the ballot. This should concern all Americans, whether you feel personally well represented by the current bipartisan system or not.
And here is the key issues for them in this election.
I stand strongly against U.S. imperialism and militarism, most recently exemplified by the Democratic Party's endless funding of the genocide of Palestinians. I believe strongly in our ability to uplift people in our country and across the world by enacting policies that promote peace, justice, and humanity, including developing a robust social support system to ensure no one is forced to live without basic dignities like food and shelter. I believe in encouraging and protecting democratic engagement in our civic institutions and discouraging the anti-democratic behavior of both of our two main political parties. I reject fascism in all its forms, including its current iteration in the skin of the Republican Party, and I also reject the notion that the Democratic Party, drifting ever rightward, is the best we can do to promote the political and environmental interests of our country and our world.
Finally, here is what they had to say when I asked them if they would be voting in their home state, where their vote would arguably be more influential.
I am no longer registered to vote in the swing state I grew up in. I now live in a reliably blue state, which allows me to vote third party without fear of spoiling the Electoral College vote. If I still lived in my home state, I would strategically swap votes with a supporter of Kamala Harris in a non-swing state, so my vote for Jill Stein would be counted in a safer state. I wish we didn't have to consider things like red states and blue states, and could just vote for the person we want to win. But the current limitations of the U.S. electoral system and the enforced domination of the Democratic and Republican parties require some creative thinking. I hope one day the U.S. will adopt a more representative voting system that allows folks to comfortably vote their true preferences across the political spectrum.
I also asked an old friend of mine if they would participate in this episode. They turned me down, saying this.
I'm out of work at the moment, and the election can sway my chances of a new job, so it's a bit triggering for me, and you can't escape it here.
That anyone would be concerned about publicly expressing their political views is very concerning. In a democracy, everyone should feel free to express their views, have conversations, and air their opinions freely. And evidently, people do not feel that they can always do that currently. Part of this for me is down to rhetoric. In this election, we have seen both sides be very critical of the other's views, as it 100% should be in an election, but they have also openly ridiculed each other. This mocking rhetoric on both sides does not help, and while I am certainly not drawing an equivalence between the rhetoric that is coming from both sides do have to be better, quite frankly. It is precisely because of this mocking rhetoric that we have seen more and more of in the last decade that both sides are now increasingly seeing each other as the enemy, with Donald Trump even going so far as to call fellow American citizens of his that oppose him as, quote, the enemy within. It is possible to disagree with each other while still maintaining civility and respect for each other. For example, just look at the conversations I've just had with Americans from across the political spectrum. As for who you should vote for, that is really not my place to say. What I will say though is if you are watching this and you haven't voted yet, really think about what you want your country to be. Think about why someone like Ruth, someone who proudly served as a diplomat in the US State Department from the time of the Clinton administration all the way through to the end of the Trump administration, and who proudly served as part of the George W. Bush administration, given everything that America was having to deal with during his time in office, as well as also proudly serving in the Obama administration, given everything that America was dealing with during his period in office. Think about why someone like her, who has seen everything she has seen, is voting for Kamala Harris. Also, think about Michael, an academic who has a degree in political science. He made it very clear that he is not voting for Kamala Harris. He is voting against Donald Trump. You know, he frankly was angry about the state of his country and disliked both political parties. It cannot be said that either Ruth or Michael is what can objectively be called a radical leftist, and yet both of them are voting for Kamala Harris. Think about what they have to say then, and if that chimes with you, then vote how you think you should vote. In the same vein, think about what David had to say, and think about the question that he asked himself. What do you want your country to be for your children and grandchildren? Because the result of this election will invariably have an effect on the type of country that they get to grow up in. In the same vein, think about what Shane had to say about why he is voting for Donald Trump. If what he had to say chimes with you, and the idea of Trump and J.D. Vance running your country is something that you are comfortable with, then 100% vote for them, as it is your country and your vote for you to use how you see fit. On that note, This brings an end to this US election special edition of the BCS podcast. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you about this election and the important issues that have been at its core. As always, I thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye bye now. The BCS podcast is written, produced, edited and hosted by me, Brett Walker. Thank you to Boris Anderoff and Pixabay for the use of the music and sound effects in this podcast. This episode features contributions from Ruth Bennett, David P. Darlington, Bret Griffin, Shane Jones and Dr Michael Leavitt, as well as contributions from 2 American citizens who wish to remain anonymous.